Welcome to video number 2 of our 4-part watercolor pencil video series. I'm Karen from Close to My Heart, and I'm excited to share some fun new techniques with you today. I want to remind you that this is video number 2. So if you haven't watched video number 1 yet, we suggest you go back and give that a little watch so that you can build on what you learned there as you watch and learn today. And lastly, before we get started, you're going to want to like, subscribe, and be sure to turn on that bell notification so you never miss a Close to My Heart video. Let's get started on learning some new ways to use our watercolor pencils. Okay, right here we have a really fun and very pretty card, wouldn't you agree? And what you see here happening on this part of our card is what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to show you so you can see a few things up nice and close. Now in our last video, we talked about using the watercolor pencils dry. Today we're actually going to be using them with a water brush, and we'll be showing how to get the look we have on this flower here, and I'm going to show you a couple of ways to use them wet that I think will be really, really fun. So let's move back to our workspace. And I'm going to show you a few little things before we actually color a whole flower. Now, there are a few ways to color wet. And I'm going to move this out of the way. And let's pretend this is a stamped circle, okay? I'm just going to make that with my orange pencil. And maybe I'll take a green pencil to color it in so you can see the difference. So I might want to take my pencil and just color around the outside of whatever image I'm coloring, and I'm going to show you a fun little trick. So if I've only just colored the outside, and I don't need to be too careful about lines and things, but you also don't want to push too hard. As I get that wet and move it, you're going to see the lines disappear, but if I pushed too hard, it will be harder. Now what I'm using is a water brush. We carry 2 different sizes here at Close to My Heart. This top part screws right off. You fill it with water. You just squeeze it a little bit. I'm going to do that to show you. And there's a little bit of water in your brush. Now as you do that, you're going to want to take your brush and follow the shape of the image that you're using. And you can pull the color in from the outside and you'll have a little bit of a natural shading going on like you see there. And actually, I think I'm going to move right over here where you can see everything just a little bit closer. So let's pull my scratch piece of paper back up here. You can kind of see what I meant there. I mean, this is just a really thin scratch piece of paper, but at least you have a general idea of what I'm talking about. Now that we've talked about that a little bit, I want to show you a couple of other things. You can see here on this example that I've created, I have some little blobs of color here. So I want to show you some fun ways to be able to use these pencils wet in addition to just coloring your image. So let's say you have a scratch piece of paper and you add a little bit of green on your paper or wherever your work surface. You can actually take your water brush, pick up some of that color, then go to your image and paint with that. So you can see that that's another fun way to create your own paints. I can go over here to ones that I did much earlier that are already dry, and just by using my water brush, I can pick up some more color and add a little darker green to the outside of what I just did. So that's another way to use your pencils wet. We talked about creating like your own little paint palette by scribbling with your pencil. We talked about just coloring the outsides of your image and pulling them in. Now let's do one of our flowers. In our first video, we also talked a little bit about using your pencils with a flat tip. So let's use this little bit darker green, and we're going to use that as our example on our leaves. The first thing I want to do is take my pencil and scribble until I've created a flat tip. And we talked a little bit about that in video 1. That helps you not have as many lines show. When you're using your watercolor pencils with a water brush, you don't have to worry quite as much about lines showing, but I still like to make sure that I'm being careful. One thing to remember when you're using your pencils with a water brush is things are going to be darker than you think. So you can always go back and add a little color but it's hard to take it away. So let's just do a little bit of shading, and you'll learn quite a bit about shading in the first video we did. And I'm just gonna get a little lighter as I go out here. And you can tell that the color that I'm adding here is very subtle, because when I add that water brush and pull this color around a little bit, you're going to be surprised at how much color I get. So I did add color all the way down the leaf, but this very bottom part of the leaf has hardly any color. And what I like to do is start at the darkest part and just add a slight amount of water and work my way to the lighter part so that I keep that nice shaded look. I'm going to do the same over here. And this one, you can see I only shaded that top part. So we talked about that when I drew with the circle here. I'm going to show you how I would do that on this leaf. I've just added that color to the top part, and I'm going to use the tip of my water brush and pull that color down from the darker area to where I want the lighter. So you can see it's a little more dramatic if I don't color the whole leaf, whereas when I do color the whole leaf and I get a little bit lighter, it's just a nice shaded look. Now I'm going to let that dry for a minute while we work on the flower, because I want you to be able to see what we can do layering with color once that's dried a little bit. So let me grab a red pencil and bring that in. Actually, this is pink. Why not? Let's use some pink on this flower. You can see on the flower example I have here and on my card that there's some lighter happening here and darker up here. And we have done just a little bit of layering before using the water brush. Here, we're going to use some color and layer in between. We've used our water brush. We're going to let that dry, then we're going to add color. So let's come back to this flower. I'm just going to color a leaf or two for you. And you can see I'm adding that darker closer to the flower here. That's where I'm wanting to shade and getting a little bit lighter as I go out. And then I'm going to grab a darker pencil. I think I'm going to even grab a little bit of a dark purple, and I'm going to use that right up against the center of that flower and a little bit along those lines. Looks really pretty already, but if I use my water brush, and I'm just going to get the green off of my water brush so that I don't mix it in with this pink and purple, it's not going to read pink and purple when I'm done. It's going to read kind of pinkish with a little bit of shadow. You got to be really careful though when you do that, when you layer those colors before coloring. If you pull the darker part to the lighter part too fast and with too much water, it's all going to look like the same color. It's going to blend them all. So you may have noticed I started right here where the dark was and just carefully sort of did feathery brush strokes to kind of work it out without destroying the light and dark. Let's do that one more time now that we've talked about it and you can see what I'm saying. So I'm coloring that leaf. I'm going to push a little harder where I want it darker. My way out. Then come back in with a darker color. In this case, we're using some purple on top of that hot pink. And watch that in action again. Now that we've talked it through, I'm just sort of carefully going over that dark area and feathering it out lightly so that it blends without ruining that shading effect we created. All right, let's go back to that leaf. We used a darker green there, and I think I'm going to grab maybe even, let's see if I've got a black one handy in here. I'm going to go with the dark brown because my black could use a sharpened job. Okay, I'm going to take this darker brown, come back in on this leaf that we already painted and add a little more shading. Now remember, video 1, we talked about using these pencils dry. And you can always start wet like we did and add dry on top, or again, add more water. So I want to show you what it looks like if we just add that dark brown without any water. That looks great, right? But if I take my water brush, and just like we did on those leaves, I don't want to just color the whole thing. It's just going to blend it all together and it will all look the same. I want to just carefully pull that color out a little bit so that it stays shaded, but I now have even more depth to my leaf. There you go. Can you see how layering colors, even with a wet brush, can give you a really good look as well as dry, like we talked about in our last video. So let's pull this card in and take another look at what we've done. We've used two different colors on the flower here, a lighter red and a darker red, one color in the center, two different greens on those leaves, and you can tell that even though this little flower is darker than this one, we did use the exact same color. All we did was add a little more and push a little harder on this than we did over here so that it got its own personality and this looks a little more lifelike, because even flowers on the very same plant are going to have variance in color, right? I hope you enjoyed that and learning some fun techniques about how to use your watercolor pencils with a water brush and getting some really cool looks and effects in the way that you use them. I hope you'll join us next week as we do video number 3 and you learn even more new ways to use your watercolor pencils.